that, I became interested in political science. So I studied political science while I was at City College, and then I transferred to UCSD. While I was at UCSD, I took a Discovering the Law program while I was working on my bachelor's, and I knew that I wanted to become an attorney. Shortly after graduating from UCSD, I applied into law school and I got into law school. And from there, while I was in law school, I was trying to figure out what kind of attorney I wanted to be. Initially, I told myself that I would do anything except for criminal defense because I thought it would hit too close to home for me. And ironically enough, that's exactly what I do now. And I can't imagine practicing any other law. While I was in law school, while I was still trying to figure it out, I remember thinking, okay, what's another thing that I'm super interested in that maybe I can practice in? And so, fun fact about me, I really love sports, and in particular basketball. So I thought maybe I wanted to be like a sports attorney agent. So I started to do some contract law, and it was so boring to me because I didn't feel like I was making a difference. So I found a position interning for the Veterans Village of San Diego. That is a nonprofit organization here that specifically works with homeless veterans on their road to recovery. And I represented them in a variety of cases. And I remember how impactful that felt. And it gave me a light into the issue of homelessness in San Diego. And so after graduating from law school, a position at Think Dignity I applied for was for the staff attorney position, where I was representing homeless and at-risk youth in their criminal defense matters. And it was the perfect marriage of everything that I was interested in, advocating for youth that had very similar experiences to myself, and also in criminal defense. And so since then, I've worked my way up and I'm executive director now, but it seems to be the perfect position for me. So that's how I got to where I am today and in the position that I am with the organization. So without further ado, I'd love to share my screen with y'all so you can see this PowerPoint. Give me a moment. Okay. Can you all see it okay? All right. Let's start off with some national statistics on homelessness, and then we'll dwindle down to specifically here in San Diego. Up to 3.5 million people have been reported as experiencing homelessness for at least one day, while over 500,000 people still remain homeless. Out of those, 23% are deemed chronically homeless. That means they've been experiencing homelessness for at least a year or more. 47% of our nation's homeless population is right here in California. And 20% of that population is unaccompanied youth. Unaccompanied youth meaning that they have no parent or guardian with them while they're experiencing homelessness. Now let's look to the local statistics. And these statistics come from, so every year, San Diego does what's called a point in time count, typically in January. And it's a time of year where volunteers get together and they literally physically go out and count everyone that's experiencing homelessness on the streets and in their cars, and they go out to different parts of the county. As you can imagine, this method is not as accurate as we would hope it would be. So, but these are the numbers these numbers come from the Regional Task Force on the Homeless's point in time count. So the last point in time count, they identified that there were 7,658 people currently experiencing homelessness in San Diego. we are the fourth largest homeless population in the nation. Out of that number, 20% are deemed chronically homeless. And as I mentioned earlier, that means that you have experienced homelessness for over a year. 79% became homeless while living in San Diego. I think there's this often common misconception that people come to San Diego because it's easier to be homeless here because of our beautiful weather, but that's factually not true. And the statistics show that 79% of people became homeless while living in San Diego. And 52% are literally unsheltered. So there's different degrees of homelessness, or not degrees, different forms of homelessness, right? So there are people that are literally unsheltered. There are people that are living in transitional housing, that are living in temporary housing, or maybe couch surfing, things like that. Those are all considered homeless. But of our particular population, 52% are unsheltered, so living on the streets. Now I want to go over some common stereotypes about people experiencing homelessness, so we can start to dismantle that and really get a better picture of what homelessness looks like in San Diego and the realities of it. So one of the stereotypes is that a large majority of homeless individuals have issues with substance abuse that prevents them from maintaining stability in their lives. When the statistics show that only 3% of homeless individuals have a substance abuse so severe that it prevents them from living stable lives. Another stereotype is that a large majority of homeless individuals have a severe mental illness. Again, only 4% of homeless individuals have a mental illness so severe that it prevents them from living normal lives. A large majority of homeless individuals abuse free services or welfare. Less than 10% of homeless individuals know about or are qualified for free services or welfare. I can tell you from experience, from the people that I've represented and that have worked with our organization, a large majority of people are not even benefiting from the resources that are available to them because they don't have access, right? Or because they don't know about it, or because it's stigmatized to utilize these free resources. And lastly, that homeless people are criminals, when in fact, homeless people are more likely to be victims of crime, right? So I thought it was really important to dismantle some of these stereotypes, because I think when we think about homelessness, oftentimes we think of perhaps the one bad experience we had with somebody who was experiencing homelessness on the street and perhaps was exhibiting signs of mental illness or substance abuse, right? When that's not the totality of the population. I can tell you from the people that I've represented, oftentimes they blend in, right? And you wouldn't even know that they were experiencing homelessness. There are children, families, parents, right? Living in their vehicles on the streets, and they're just trying to maintain their lives. Let's talk about privileges, right? So what is it? They're rights, benefits, and advantages given by nature of one's identity and enjoyed by a person or body of persons beyond the advantages of other individuals. So why is this important? Because to understand the imbalance that societal standards have set for privileges, we're able to expand our empathy and fully support others without exacerbating our privilege gaps. So we could better understand, hear from, and feel the kinds of things that homeless folks are experiencing, so that we can better come up with solutions. Okay, now let's go on to the causes of homelessness, right? Because there's this common misconception that people experiencing homelessness are lazy and don't work. But let's talk about this. What are some of the causes? the lack of affordable housing for individuals or families who are already homeless. How difficult it is to get housing in San Diego is insane for people experiencing homelessness. I can share some more stories, but I'll save them for later on. Employment wages are not enough to cover the cost of living in San Diego. So the cost of living skyrockets in San Diego while wages continue to remain stagnant, right? Adult and childhood victimization and trauma that hinders positive growth. The criminalization of homelessness prevents individuals from accessing resources. The lack of resources for certain homeless demographic groups, right? So extremely vulnerable populations, like the Black and Brown community, right? The LGBTQ community, things like that. And the school to prison pipeline that prevents youth from receiving adequate support. So let's talk about the criminalization in homelessness. Because we mentioned a little bit earlier that that UC Berkeley found that there were over 500 municipal codes that criminalize basic life-sustaining activities like standing, sitting, sleeping, eating, right? So in this presentation, we're going to go through how that continues to perpetuate poverty by criminalizing these life-sustaining activities. So what are infractions? So infractions are petty offenses that are typically punishable by fine, but not jail time. Because infractions cannot result in a jail sentence or even probation, defendants charged with infractions do not have the right to a jury trial. So there are different levels of criminal proceedings, right? So there are infractions, the bottom, then there are misdemeanors and felonies, right? We often hear about misdemeanors and felonies, but most folks don't know that infractions are also considered like a criminal offense, but these are like typically, you know, like you get tickets for while you're driving, right? So these are what's called infractions. They're the lowest level of a criminal offense because they cannot be punished by jail time, and by definition are only punishable by a fine. So before we get started, I put these four criminal acts, right, that homeless folks are typically receive. And I want you to take a look at them. So we've got a parking ticket here. We've got unauthorized encroachment. That means they're sleeping on the sidewalk. We've got urinating in public, and we've got expectorating. So for people that are wondering what expectorating is, it means spitting. I also did not know that that was a crime until I represented someone who had a ticket for expectorating. So I want you to look at these different criminal offenses, and I want you to think about what you think the impact is of getting one of these tickets, right? And in the chat, can you put them in order for what you think is the most severe to the least severe? I'll give you guys a couple of minutes to do that. Or I don't know if we want to do that in the chat or allow people to speak, whichever works for me, so that we can have a conversation about it. I see someone put unauthorized encroachment. Would that be your first? Someone says this would be a bit different during COVID, I would think. What do you mean? What do you think would be different? So someone would put unauthorized encroachment first, parking ticket second, urinating in public, and then spitting. Someone put urinating in public first. Somebody put unauthorized encroachment first. Somebody put spitting first. Another urinating in public first. A lot of people are putting urinating in public first. No, the fines haven't gone up because of COVID for urinating or spitting in public. Parking ticket first, unauthorized encroachment second, urinating in public, and then expectorating. Okay, some people put A, B, C, D. All right, so everybody kind of has a different way in which they would put them in order based on the impact, right? I got another urinating in public first, unauthorized encroachment first. Now, let me give you some more information. Let me tell you some of the impacts of these tickets, right? What if I told you that with a parking ticket, you're living in your vehicle, this is your 4th parking ticket. And on the 5th parking ticket, your vehicle would be impounded. You're also disabled and living on a fixed income. Most folks that are living in RVs are disabled and living on a fixed income, right? So this is your only source of safe haven. For unauthorized encroachment, what if I told you, but with an unauthorized encroachment, this is actually a misdemeanor. It's not an infraction. And so you can be put on 3 years of probation, and they can impose what's called a stay away order. A stay away order is similar to a restraining order, right? But a restraining order restricts you from being within a certain distance of a particular person, whereas a stay away order restricts you from being within a certain distance of a particular area. Urinating in public, again, a criminal record. And this is a wobbler. That means they can charge it as either a misdemeanor or a felony. So that means you could get 3 to 5 years of probation, and you may have to register as a sex offender. And then expectorating, right? Spitting on the street. This is a fine of $198. If you don't show up to your first court appointment, the court imposes what's called a civil assessment, $300. If you don't show up again, they send it to the court's collection agency, which is called Alliance One, and it starts accruing interest. They send it to Revenue and Recovery after that. And again, it starts accumulating interest. After that, they send it to the Franchise Tax Board. And at the Franchise Tax Board, they can start garnishing your wages up to 25%. And because you didn't show up for your civil assessment, this is only an infraction, right? Expectorating. So again, by definition, can only be punishable by fine. But there's a caveat to this. If you don't appear in court, the court can issue a bench warrant for your arrest. This is a misdemeanor bench warrant. So yes, you can be arrested for failing to appear, right? So that's kind of the loophole here. Okay, so now with knowing some of the impacts of these tickets or misdemeanors, of these criminal offenses, now how would you rank them? Please keep in mind that you are someone that's experiencing homelessness. Now how would you put them in order? From most severe to least severe. Are you guys putting it in the chat? Sorry, I accidentally moved it. Somebody put urinating in public first, somebody put expectorating first, somebody. Okay, we're getting a variety of different things. Somebody put urinating in public and then the parking ticket, then expectorating, and then unauthorized encroachment, urinating in public. expectorating, unauthorized encroachment, and then parking ticket. Urinating in public, parking ticket, unauthorized encroachment, and then expectorating. Urinating in public, unauthorized encroachment, parking ticket, and expectorating. Okay, we're getting a variety of different ways in which you guys would put this in order. Another urinating in public, parking ticket, expectorating, and then unauthorized encroachment. So I see that everyone has a different way in which they would put these in order. And that's the point of this exercise, right? Is that this individually, we would prioritize our needs differently, right? There's no right answer on which one would have the most impact because it's based on your particular circumstance, right? Maybe somebody who, if they are disabled and they have to live in their RV, that would be their number one thing, right? Maybe for somebody else, having a criminal record is their number one thing, right? Maybe someone just got a job and now their wages are being garnished 25% and they already don't make enough to pay rent here in San Diego, right? So that's the point of this exercise, is to show that we would all prioritize our needs differently based on our circumstances, right? So it's unfair to impose the idea that homeless folks should prioritize their legal needs, particularly when their basic needs are not being met, right? When they don't have housing, when they don't remember the last time they ate, right? And so this is what happens with folks experiencing homelessness. Oftentimes, they let their legal issues fall by the wayside because of everything else that they've got going on that is prioritized over this, right? So let's talk about these legal ramifications of homelessness. So here in San Diego, the police department would ticket folks for what's called illegal lodging. That means sleeping on the street, right? What happened was the city got sued for ticketing folks for this because it was considered unconstitutional to do so. So in doing so, during the settlement conference, they agreed that they would no longer ticket people within the city of San Diego sleeping on the streets between the times of 9 p.m. and 5:30 a.m., right? And so now what happens is right before 9 p.m. or right after 5:30, they do what's called homeless sweeps. So the police department goes out there and starts ticketing everyone, picking up their things and throwing them in the garbage, right? This is why there was a lawsuit against the city, because they would toss people's things in the trash can and they would throw them away, right? And that's unconstitutional. You can't just throw away people's property. In fact, there was a particular instance in which they picked up some belongings they thought was trash on the street, and they threw it into the dumpster. And they actually picked up a woman experiencing homelessness, and she was close to getting crushed by the trash dump. And so after this settlement, we saw a decrease in the amount of tickets for illegal lodging, but we saw an increase in the amount of tickets for unauthorized encroachment. So let me tell you about what unauthorized encroachment is, right? Unauthorized encroachment is when the reason that this municipal code was put into place was because it was made to protect the city from liability from lawsuits. And so what happens is, now we see it all the time because of COVID, but prior to the pandemic, we would see, people putting putting like menu signs out on the sidewalk, or chairs and patio furniture so people could sit outside. So what happens if somebody is walking down the street and they happen to trip on one of these things, right? Who's this, and they get injured? Who's that person going to sue? Likely they're going to sue the city and not the business, because the city has the deep pockets that they could go after, right? So the city said, no, we've got to protect ourselves from this kind of liability. So they put this municipal code in place to protect themselves, right? So now it's on the onus of the business owner to ensure that they are leaving enough space on the sidewalk for people to walk, right? And so, so what happens was, so when the settlement for illegal lodging happened, there was a decrease in the amount of people for got ticketed for illegal lodging, and an increase in the amount of people that were getting ticketed for unauthorized encroachment. I mean, a huge spike. And again, this is a misdemeanor. So people get jail time for this. They get on 3 years of probation. They get exponential fees and fines, warrants for their arrests. I can share with you an example, a couple of examples of some clients that I've represented. When I first started working at Think Dignity, I was representing a young woman who kept getting ticketed for unauthorized encroachment. She had 3 separate criminal convictions for this. So she was on probation for 3 separate convictions, and these did not run. So she has 3. So say she has like 3 years. She has 3 years for each, right? And so what happened was, as a condition of her probation, they imposed the stay away order that required her from not accessing the entire vicinity of East Village, so the downtown area, which is the hub of homeless serving agencies, right? What happened was she got when I started representing her, she actually got into housing at one of the shelters in downtown, but couldn't get in because her probation literally prevented her from accessing it. I should also add, at the time she got ticketed, she was 8 months pregnant and now had a newborn baby. So when I represented her in court to try to modify her probation to lift the stay away order, the city attorney went tooth and nail against me from preventing her to access that shelter, right? We eventually won. We got her off probation from her other cases as well. But that's kind of the counterintuitive nature of the way that we've been addressing homelessness in San Diego, right? It's counterproductive. If somebody is sleeping on the streets, we should be providing them access to the resources that they need, right? And not criminalizing them for their lack of resources. And in San Diego, there is not enough housing for folks experiencing homelessness. We have spent so much money on Band-Aid fixes without addressing the root causes of homelessness so that we can find long-term solutions that effectively address our homelessness crisis. I'll give you one more example of a client that I represented. That is perhaps was one of the most impactful clients that I've represented. I was representing a young man who kept getting ticketed for sleeping on the street. He kept getting ticketed at the same spot by the same police officer who knew he had nowhere to go and nowhere to sleep. And so I was representing him, and I was talking to opposing counsel. We were looking to get his case dismissed. And while it's the weekend, I get a phone call from him. It was the day before we were supposed to appear in court, and I had been trying to contact him and I couldn't get a hold of him. He called me on the weekend. I don't usually answer phone calls on the weekend, but I knew that it was a jail call, and I answered the phone, and it was my client. He had gotten picked up again right before our court appearance. And he was crying to me on the phone. saying that he didn't want to live anymore if he was going to continue to be criminalized for sleeping. And I told him to hang on, that I would get him out and that I would take on this new case as well. And I did. I got him out and I took on that new case as well. We had 5 cases in which he had been charged for the same thing by the same officer. On our way to court, when I was representing him, we get to court and I got all of his cases dismissed, all of them, all his cases dismissed. And let me preface this by saying, that morning I picked him up on a sidewalk. After he got out, I picked him up on the side from like a sidewalk in Pacific Beach, and I brought him back to my office before we could get to court. I gave him some hygiene items, some food, and I allowed him to take a nap before we were to head to court. Right before we needed to get to court, I, gently tried to wake him up, and he was so startled that he almost punched me. And he apologized profusely because he said that the last couple of times that he had been woken up out of his sleep, it was by a police officer trying to arrest him for sleeping. We get to court and we get all of his cases dismissed, all of them, all 5 of his cases dismissed, completely dismissed, no fees, no fines, no jail time, no nothing. And it was raining heavily in San Diego. And I asked him, where can I take you? And he said that he had nowhere to go. And he asked me to drop him back off at that same spot in which he kept getting ticketed. And I told him that there was no freaking way that I was going to drop him back off to get ticketed by the same police officer. So I brought him back to my office. It was already past 5 o'clock by this time. I brought him back to my office and I called every homeless serving agency I knew, and I couldn't find him housing. I could not find him shelter because, as I mentioned, it was doing this thing that it rarely does in San Diego. It was raining very heavily and their shelters were impacted. And I couldn't find anywhere for him to be. And he was resting in my office, and I took a walk out to my car and I just started sobbing because I couldn't believe that this is what I do for a living, right? That I did everything that I said that I would do. I represented him in all of his cases and I got all of his convictions dismissed. And that was still not enough for him. That still, in my position and this privilege that I have, I was not able to find him a safe place to be, right? And I remember my coworker coming up to me and she had a conversation with me. She was like, just go home, right? Just go home and think about it tomorrow. I'm like, he doesn't have that option, right? Like, we have to fix this now. I was fortunate enough that I know some incredible community advocates who got together and provided a room for him for the night, because that's all I needed. I actually found a place for him to be. He just couldn't be there that night. I found a housing option for him. He just couldn't get in that night. So we got him a hotel for the night. And I remember I picked him up the next morning afterwards, and he talked about how he had a snack binge and had the best shower that he had ever taken in his life. And and the next day I brought him into the transitional housing, place that I got him into. And since then, he's been super successful. He got a job, he bought his own car, right? But this is what it takes, right? To get somebody experiencing homelessness access to the resources that they need. And that's what the cops should have done at the first interaction. That's what we should have done from him from the very beginning, right? There were so many opportunities in which we could have stepped in and done something different, something better, something more, right? And that's the approach we should be taking with homelessness. Police should not be the first responders to people experiencing homelessness, people experiencing mental health crises, right? People experiencing substance abuse. We should be connecting them to the resources they desperately need and not criminalizing them for it, right? Because this only perpetuates poverty. So let's talk about Think Dignity and the work that we do, right? So we are a homeless advocacy agency here in San Diego. We started in about 2006 by a group of professional women, mostly attorneys, who saw an issue with homelessness in San Diego and wanted to do something about it. So initially, we were completely volunteer-based, right? At the time, we were called Girls Think Tank. And since then, we changed our name to Think Dignity because we thought that it sounded more inclusive of the work that we were doing in the community, right? And we really take this approach very seriously about providing dignity to folks experiencing homelessness. I'll share one more story and I'll get off my soapbox, right? About a client that I was representing. One of my very first clients that I represented. So I told you I started as a staff attorney at Think Dignity. And I love the organization and our mission and the way that we went about our work and how passionate we were. And as a new attorney, I was, a new social justice warrior. I was ready to change the world one client at a time. And I would walk around in my suit all the time. And I remember one of my very first clients, I kept trying to set up a meeting with him. I kept trying to set up the meeting for 10 o'clock in the morning because I figured most people start their time at their day at like 9 a.m. 10 o'clock shouldn't be too early for a young man, right? So I set the appointment for 10 o'clock and he missed the appointment at least 4 times, right? So after that, he finally gave me a call and he said that he was ready to meet. And I went to go meet him. It was actually right near City College. I went to go meet him on, like on a bench over there by City College. And when I went to go meet him, I asked him if he had the bank statements I had been requesting, and he said he didn't have them. And when I asked him why not, he tells me it's because he didn't have a printer. I'm like, duh, he doesn't have a printer. And I was like, well, did you go down to the bank and try to have them print them for you? And he told me that they were going to charge him $3 for the statement, and he didn't have $3. So I told him, okay, let's walk down there. Let's walk down there together. That bank was only 2 blocks down the street. And I was like, we can walk together. And he told me he couldn't walk because he wasn't feeling well. And when I asked him why not, he tells me it's because his stomach was burning in pain because he couldn't remember the last time he ate. I was fortunate enough to have a sandwich in my bag at the time, and I handed it over to him, asked him if he wanted it. And we continued on with our meeting, and I noticed that he wasn't eating the sandwich. And like, fun fact about me, there was like I like mustard, and there was like mad mustard on it, right? And so I was, jokingly, I asked him, it's because you don't like mustard, huh? There's like way too much mustard on this sandwich. And he tells me, no, it's because his friend also hadn't eaten in days, and he wanted to split it with him later on that day. I remember this experience shaping me, right? I later found out that the reason he didn't make our appointments the last 4 times is because he was literally unsheltered homeless, and he was too afraid to sleep at night. So instead, he would walk all night long. And in the morning, he would sneak into his friend's apartment who lived in transitional housing, and you're not allowed to have anybody over, but he would sneak in and get a couple of hours of rest. And by the time he woke up, everything was getting ready to close, right? And this experience shaped how I saw myself as an attorney. First, I stopped wearing suits everywhere I freaking went, right? Because there's a power dynamic there, right? Of meeting with an attorney and how intimidating that could be, right? And that really shaped how I saw myself as more of an advocate, right? So it's funny, I really take that to heart, the community lawyering kind of thing, that I represented this guy, got his cases dismissed. And afterwards, we're walking out of the courthouse and he looks at me and he says, oh, you're like a lawyer. I'm like, yeah, I've been a lawyer this whole time. So that just shows you like the heart of Think Dignity and how we approach our work, and really how we approach advocacy in providing dignity in all the ways that, in all the different programs that we have. Okay. Let's go through some of these programs. Oh, let's start with our mission: to inspire, empower, and organize our community to advance basic dignity for those living on the streets. So when I say we're a homeless advocacy agency, I don't just say we're a homeless serving agency, because we're not just homeless providers, right? We actually advocate for these causes. We're the only homeless organization that advocates to advance these causes. Prior to the pandemic, we held monthly meetings called our Basic Dignity Coalition, where we would have community members and people experiencing homelessness come together so that we can collaborate, identify and discuss issues, and create responses, right, to these issues and fill these gaps. All of our programs were created out of ideas that were born out of the Basic Dignity Coalition. Don't do that anymore, so I skipped through it. We also have our survival distribution. So this happens twice a year, during the summer months and the winter months, where we provide survival supplies, backpacks, sleeping bag, hygiene items, socks, right? And based on the weather, right? So during our summer distribution, which is coming up shortly, so keep posted on our social media to see how you can help to support our next survival distribution. Like during the summer months, we provide hats, sunscreen, things like that. During the winter months, we provide warmer clothing, sleeping bags, and things like that. Okay. Our transitional storage center. So we have a transitional storage center located in downtown San Diego, where we have about 400 bins and lockers. We allow folks to safeguard their belongings while they're transitioning off of the streets, right? One of the biggest barriers for people experiencing homelessness is to accessing, job interviews, going to school, getting to medical appointments, is that they literally have to haul everything they own on their backs everywhere they go, right? Imagine if you had to do that, and what a burden it would be, right? What a barrier it would be, especially if you have to use public transportation. Because now there are laws on public transportation that you can only carry a certain amount of items. And again, that was likely particularly targeted to homeless folks, right? These stats here show that it costs at least just $1 per day to maintain the storage locker. We don't charge any of our clients, but that's just to give you a figure of how much it costs to run the facility. We have helped to transition more than 500 people experiencing homelessness because they found a job or permanent housing. I love this incredible story of a young man who used our storage lockers to store his books and his laptop while he attended school. And after he graduated, he got a really good paying job and was able to transfer his locker on to the next person. And 2 of our 3 employees at our transitional storage center were actually former clients of ours, and they were experiencing homelessness, and we've hired them on. Our Fresh Start Shower program. So this is a 2-unit mobile shower, as you can see here, that we take to different parts of the county, and we allow folks access to hygiene, right? We provide all the things that somebody would need. So a towel, toiletries, right? Everyone is given 15 minutes, and then we really try to make each site a resource hub. So we partner up with other organizations so that they can provide health screenings, dental screenings, pet supplies, and then other really cool organizations that have provided meditation or yoga or played the drums to really make it a fun and welcoming environment. We understand how difficult it is for people to even access our resources, so we want to make it worth their while. Our Fresh Start showers have been shut down because of the pandemic, but we're hoping to reopen this summer. We have our street boutique. Again, what we are hearing from women experiencing homelessness is that oftentimes they didn't have access to menstrual hygiene products because they were so costly, or because many service providers don't provide them. And so what they would do is makeshift menstrual hygiene products, and it would only exacerbate their health concerns. And so we created this program to directly address that need. It's a pop-up shop. We now have like an online shop where people are able to shop for their brand new unused undergarments And then we give them a month's worth of menstrual hygiene items. And so we set it up like a retail store. What we do is they get to select all the items, our staff packages them for them, and then we hand deliver them to the organization in which we're working with to give them to their participants. Our street cafe. So our street cafe happens twice a month during the second and the fourth Monday of each month at Mariners Point, where we provide, this is like a pop-up farmers market, we like to call it, where we provide healthier meal options and produce. Again, what we were hearing from folks experiencing homelessness is oftentimes they were given leftover foods or foods with little to no nutritional value, or foods that were not in line with their dietary restrictions. And again, in order to provide dignity to folks, that includes the dignity of deciding what can go into your body, right? What kinds of foods you put into your body. So we try to provide healthier food options of produce. We provide sandwiches, and now we provide it's called the Street Cafe. Now we provide warm, hot drinks. And then, of course, our legal advocacy department. And our legal advocacy department consists of a number of different things. So we have our legal clinics, right? So we had 8 legal clinics around the county where we allowed folks to come in and talk to us with their legal matters. From there, we can take them on directly as a client, or we can take them on directly as a client, or we can refer them to an agency that works particularly in that area of law. From our legal clinics, that's really where we hear about what's going on the streets. And we also participate in a lot of impact litigation, so like class action lawsuits. So whenever we hear about those new things, we usually hear them from our legal clinics. We talked a little bit earlier about how I started at Think Dignity with our Homeless Youth Legal and Advocacy Project. So this is for at-risk or homeless youth ages 14 to 27 for the criminal defense matters. We provide not only direct representation, but connection to social services and resources. We focus specifically on like post-conviction relief. So after somebody has been convicted of something, how can we alleviate some of the legal barriers, right? Maybe through an expungement, getting them off of probation early, things like that, right? Because we understand what a hindrance a criminal conviction can have on you, right? If you have a criminal conviction, it prevents you from accessing subsidized housing, prevents you from getting employment opportunities, from getting financial aid from school, right? From accessing county benefits, right? And so we want to alleviate those barriers so that it's easier for them to transition their lives, right? And then lastly, we have kind of our Know Your Rights campaign. So there's a photo here of the Know Your Rights cards that we have created. And so these are laminated so that they're weatherproof, they can withstand all the elements, and they have just kind of like quick tidbits of information and contact information for specific areas of law that we've seen homeless folks be, need more information in. And then we also do Know Your Rights training, specifically when dealing with law enforcement, so that we can empower and educate individuals on what their rights are. So if you're looking for ways to support, there are a number of different ways that you can support, right? You can volunteer with our organization. We have a volunteer form right on our website, thinkdignity.org. You can donate, you can become a member, you can partner with us. If you have cool services you can provide, we can find ways to partner and collaborate, or you can be an ally, right? One of the easiest things you can do is to be an ally, right? To have these conversations with your loved ones. I think oftentimes When we think about homelessness, the name of this presentation is Don't Look Away, right? Is that you're walking down the street, you see folks experiencing homelessness, and you just turn a blind eye because it's easier to look away than to confront the issues, right? And I think that's oftentimes what we do, because it's more comfortable to not deal with it because maybe you don't think it's your concern, right? But it's more challenging, more courageous to have these conversations so that we can dismantle some of these stereotypes, so that we can collaborate, so that we can work together and find more effective solutions, right? So we can speak to our elected officials and tell them what we need, right? And tell them, bring homeless folks into the conversation because they have the solutions, but oftentimes they're left out of the circles of the decision-making process, right? So there's so many things that you can do to support our work. Here's my contact information. If you guys have any questions about anything that I've talked about here, or even, like ways that you'd like to know more or collaborate with us, feel free to shoot me an email and I'd be happy to have further conversation about these things. And that is all from me. I would love to open it up for questions for folks if anyone has any questions for me.
Hi, Mitchelle. So we have some questions from earlier. I'm going to start with those, and then as questions come in, you can definitely answer them.
Sure.
We want to make sure we get everyone. So Francesca Collier had asked, how is that fair? How is it fair to the poor middle class that lives down there, I'm assuming in downtown East Village area, has for generations and can't do anything about the impact of break-ins and health issues and other crimes associated with the homeless issues because they have no money or are illegal themselves? What do you see as a solution for all sides involved?
Again, that's why there's so much importance in collaboration, right? That we talk about these issues openly, right? Because if we all got together and talked about the real solutions for homelessness, these issues wouldn't affect other folks, right? And so I hear this, a lot of the times the argument is like, the people on the streets are bringing down their property value. So instead, what SDPD does is they move homeless folks along. So they move them out of the neighborhood. So maybe it's out of sight for you, but it's still an issue, right? And so we need to address the root causes. And when we talk about addressing homelessness, there are two things that have been hugely important across the nation for cities that have severely reduced their homelessness population. One is decriminalization. We need to stop criminalizing people for participating in these life-sustaining activities. They obviously don't have access to resources, so we need to think of better solutions that don't involve law enforcement and getting people entrenched in the criminal justice system that only continues to perpetuate their poverty, right? We need people that are clinicians to deal with mental health issues, right? We need people that are knowledgeable about substance abuse. We need people that we need to create more housing options for folks and long-term housing. San Diego spent so much money on these bridge shelters, which were a temporary band-aid fix just to say they were doing something, right? We need to really invest in long-term solutions so we can address it. The second thing is advocating for the housing first model. So the housing first model is exactly what it sounds like, is that we provide the housing first and any other resources they need to follow. But the first thing we need to do is shelter people, right? To get them off of the streets. I'm sure you all are aware of, the tragic incident that happened last week when a car veered onto a homeless encampment and killed 3 of our unhoused neighbors, right? This could have been prevented if we didn't have folks living on the streets, right? If we got them into shelter, into housing, and that's what we need to do. All of the programs here in San Diego have too many restrictions, right? The reason we even created the Homeless Youth Legal and Advocacy Project is because we had a youth come in to talk to us about his legal issues, and he tells us that there are no options for him because he's not a former foster youth, he's not addicted to drugs. He doesn't abuse alcohol, but he's homeless. But being homeless was not enough. And oftentimes, these service providers require you to have a severe mental illness, suffer from substance abuse, right? There's so many restrictions to accessing housing. We need to provide people the housing and then provide them the additional resources that they need, right? I think that's the solution, is that we all need to come together and support the things that have been proven to work, right? And those are the two things that have been proven to drastically reduce homeless populations, right? And in turn, would help to alleviate the issues that you mentioned about, break-ins and potential crimes, things that shouldn't even be a crime, right? So those are the solutions, I would say.
Thank you, Mitchelle. We have another question. How can I confront microaggressions towards the homeless community? Some peers in my class were having a conversation about a person standing in the middle of the street, and they were laughing and calling him a crackhead and other types of jokes. To me, they are not jokes, but I don't know how to confront them and tell them that what they are doing is wrong and is based on discrimination.
Yeah. You open up those conversations. Oftentimes it's difficult to have the conversations with your loved ones, right? Or, your friends, things like that, because you don't want to have the tension of the conversation, but you need the tension in the conversation. And that's the only way to address it, right? You say, he's obviously experiencing, maybe mental illness, or he has experienced substance abuse. One thing that I didn't mention earlier that I should mention here is that a lot of people think that maybe substance abuse or mental illness are the cause of people's homelessness. But we never talk about how homelessness causes mental illness and substance abuse. The people that I have represented have talked about that the reason they started abusing substances is because it helped them to not have to face the realities of what it's like to experience homelessness, right? That's a tragedy. That's a tragedy that people have to find ways to make life easier to live, right? That people are experiencing mental illness because of what it's like to live on the streets, right? So you've got to have those conversations. Maybe pull up some statistics. Like, did you know that, because there's this idea that everybody experiencing homelessness is a crackhead, right? Shoot them down with the statistics, right? That I shared earlier, right? That less than 4% of people experiencing homelessness have a substance abuse so severe. Or like, have you ever thought about why he was abusing substances, right? Or why is that a point that's funny to you, right? If that was your family member experiencing that, exhibiting those behaviors, would you do the same, right? So opening up these conversations, and I know how challenging it can be, because trust me, I have the same conversations with my family, and this is what I do for a living, that sometimes I'm like, yo, do you even know what I do? Like, it's wild, right? And so you just have to have these conversations. You open it up, maybe ask open-ended questions to see what their explanation would be, right? And point them to resources. Maybe say, maybe instead of doing that, maybe the next time you're walking down the street, you can have a resource packets to give out to folks, right? That you could do something that's more productive than hurtful, because we need to reshape this narrative in San Diego of what homelessness looks like, right? And that's challenging, but what happens is people do this, right? You demonize the community, and then you justify why you criminalize them, because you see them as less than human. And we've seen this with throughout history of how we have oppressed Black and brown communities, right? This is the same thing that's happening to the homeless community, right? So have the conversation. Don't be, it's gonna be uncomfortable, but that's a step you've got to take. That's the kind of courage it takes to reshape this narrative.
We also have a question in the chat. What do you think is different about the US and other countries, many of which are much poorer than the US, but don't have the same homeless problems we have here?
Because the US is a capitalistic nation, right? that we run on money. And so oftentimes we don't think about what's going to benefit the people that are impoverished, people that have less access to resources. So we continue to perpetuate wealth and widen the gap between the classes, right? And so, and that's why we see this severe homelessness issue in the US.
There was a question about what do you think about winter shelters?
About winter shelters, just providing it during like the colder months.
I think just in general, probably.
I think that any kind I think that any kind of shelter is imperative, right? We need to get people into places where they can keep warm, particularly during the colder months. But I would suggest that we push more for long-term solutions, right? Because it's even more damaging to give someone shelter for 2 to 3 months and then kick them back out on the streets. So if that's what we have to do so that we can provide something for now, that's cool, right? That's helpful. But what's more helpful is that we start investing in these long-term solutions, not these temporary fixes, right? So that we can really, because it's not going to take 2 months for people to get themselves on their feet, right? Sometimes it'll take months, sometimes it'll take years, and we need to give people the opportunity to do that. And the only way to do that is to provide them a stable place to live. So San Diego needs to invest, like we have the money to do so, right? To invest in these long-term housing options.
I actually have a question that I would like. You just spoke about having long-term housing options. As a member of the community, I have participated in several meetings with the San Diego Housing Commission and other constituencies like it. And one of the things that I notice is that folks are always focused on getting people to be sober in order to be able to go into those long-term housing facilities. Could you maybe talk a little bit about why, in my opinion, it should be the other way around? I don't necessarily think someone should be quote unquote sober in order to have access to housing.
I agree. And that's exactly what I was talking about earlier, right? About the housing first model. Because again, like I was talking about, so many of these service providers have too many restrictions on who can access their resources, right? Then you eliminate so much of the population, right, from accessing resources. So there are all these service gaps of people that can't access any resources because maybe they're not sober. Like that's the issue, right? Is that they're sober. How do we help that, right? But now you're not allowing them into the housing, right? And so that's why it's important to promote the housing first model, where we provide the stability of housing first, so we can get them stable enough that we can start addressing the root causes, right, of their homelessness, whether that's substance abuse, alcohol abuse, mental illness, right? Whether it's just because they didn't have a stable place to be, to start looking for employment, right? Things like that. So yeah, I think it's important that we focus on making sure that people are housed first and not putting restrictions and barriers to accessing resources. Because again, that's counterproductive, and you are not providing resources to a large portion of your population. You can't provide services and X out a certain amount of the population, right? It's not going to be effective.
We have a question. I love what I will forever carry a mustard laden sandwich with me from here forward. I love what you said about sort of reclaiming or reframing the narrative. What do you see as something that maybe City College as an institution might be able to do or provide for the folks experiencing homelessness on our campus? Examples like designated temporary housing or one of our buildings or something like that.
Yeah, I think that there's something that every institution can do, and particularly city, right? That you are kind of in the center of the homelessness crisis there, right? I know that you guys provide a lot of supportive services. Am I correct about for students specifically experiencing homelessness.
That is correct.
Yeah, perhaps even provide, I like the idea of temporary housing or even spaces for students to park if they're experiencing homelessness, right? So we have some safe parking lots in San Diego, but sometimes they're full or they're difficult to access because maybe the location is not good for them, and they're so difficult to access. There are some that you have to call and like reserve your spot. Like, what if you don't have a phone to call? Like, we just don't have enough spots for people, for the amount of people that are living unsheltered but in their vehicles. We don't have enough safe parking spots for that. So maybe that's an idea as well.
Thank you so much, Mitchelle. We have time for one more question if someone wants to stick one in the chat, maybe someone that hasn't had a chance to ask yet. Also, I just wanted to share that City College does host food drives, or not food drives, but drive-throughs where folks can come and receive groceries. I definitely recommend that you go to SD City College website to look at when that's happening. They happen once a month. Also, we provide clothing vouchers to our students for our boutique on campus. So if any student on our campus has an upcoming interview or anything of that nature, we definitely provide free clothing to our students and basic toiletries. So those are just a couple of examples of things that City College is doing currently.
Awesome.
It doesn't look like we have any more questions, but I just want to remind folks. Well, first, let me just say thank you so much to you, Mitchelle Woodson, for being here with us. Thank you to Think Dignity for all the work that you are doing around helping our community members, because at the end of the day, they're still a part of our community, and we must support them. So again, thank you, Mitchelle, for the knowledge, for your word today. We are so grateful for you, for the work that you do, for your heart in this work. We know it's not easy, but we do appreciate and we see you. So thank you again. We honor you in this moment. Thank you to all of our attendees at this conference. We are so happy that you were able to make this afternoon session. We just want to remind folks to please fill out the survey. We will put the link in the chat. If you could just take 5 minutes, it's 12 questions, I believe, and they're mostly multiple choice. Also, we're going to be sharing the links to Think Dignity. Please visit their website. We are fundraising for them this year. We see that there have been a couple of donations on Instagram. We're hoping to get a few more. So please definitely visit their website. You will see there, it's been posted in the chat. Again, thank you so much, Mitchelle. Thank you all to you that were here this afternoon. Be careful, be safe. We're thinking of all of our Asian American folks. We definitely stand with you all during this time. Our hearts go out to you, and we are definitely going to show up when we need to show up. So we just wanted to give a shout out. Again, thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Be careful, take care.
Bye, thank you.
Thank y'all. See you. Thanks, Z. Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you, everybody.